Hello, this is Patty. I'm going to cover another video for, something I'm interested in, something that I've looked at and I've been interested in. It's the case about a young woman named Hae Min Lee who was the victim of a terrible crime in 1999. This has stretched out, and you would think, wow, that's so old. But there are things that are occurring legally with this as recent as this year. Recently, in October of last year, 2022, the conviction of the person who was convicted of the crime, Adnan Syed, who was a classmate and an ex boyfriend of hers, was overturned. That was reversed this year, a couple of months later, because the family said they weren't the Lee family said they weren't notified of the major hearing in the crime. As a victim of crime in Baltimore, I can tell you that they are not good about letting you know if there's something going on with your case. So I'm gonna here. Let's start. This is a video. I was unsure where to start with all of this because there's so much. There are podcasts, three major ones, and I'm sure dozens more. An HBO documentary, four parts, a book, um, countless news stories, and all sorts of opinions. My son said I needed to have an opinion, a goal of where I was going, and I thought I did at first when I started looking at some of these things. Not really sure I do at this point. But let us take a look at this. This is I was wondering where should I go with this? And I'm gonna start at the end. I'm gonna start with what's going on now. So this is a video from Court TV that describes the case now. I really don't want to hit everything from the matter of the case. I understand that's where a lot of the material will come from, but we need to remember that this is a crime for somebody who deserves justice. So let's go.
The justice.
This is working. Somebody help me.
The
There we go.
justice. We can wait. Hey, we'll wait. We'll wait.
What a moment. Adnan Syed walking out a free man after his murder conviction was tossed, and it was the prosecutor's idea, by the way.
Yep.
Marilyn Mosby, at the time, the former state attorney for Baltimore, Maryland. What a conclusion, right? The Serial podcast is the true crime podcast that put podcasting like on the map, became a phenomenon, and then he's released. But then, subsequent to that, all of a sudden, things turned around a little bit. Take a listen. This is Mallory Sophostai from our great affiliate WMAR with the rest of the story.
Yes.
The Maryland Court of Appeals is essentially ordering a do-over of the hearing that vacated Syed's conviction last fall. Syed was first convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend Hae Min Lee back in 2000. That conviction was vacated in October when former state's attorney Marilyn Mosby filed a motion to vacate after an investigation by her office uncovered new evidence undermining that conviction. However, Hae Min Lee's brother, Young Lee, said his rights were violated when he wasn't given enough time to attend that hearing in person. Lee lives in California. The state notified him one business day before the hearing was scheduled. The Maryland Court of Appeals issued its decision siding with Lee. In a 2-1 decision, Judge Graff wrote, quote, because the court violated Mr. Lee's right to notice of and his right to attend the hearing on the state's motion to vacate, we have the power and obligation to remedy that injury. That remedy is a new legally compliant, transparent hearing on the motion to vacate where Mr. Lee is given notice of the hearing that is sufficient to allow him to attend in person. The court said this mandate would be delayed for 60 days to allow both parties time to decide how they want to proceed. We've reached out to the state's attorney's office. We're told they're reviewing the decision and will allow the appeals process to play itself out. Syed and his legal team can appeal this decision to the Maryland Supreme Court.
And they have. But what does that mean? What is going on with this case? It's like watching a tennis match. It goes from here to there, back and forth. Need some help. Let's bring in our special guest to discuss these new details. Joining us from Annapolis, Maryland, reporter for the Associated Press, who's been all over this thing. Brian Witte is with us. Brian, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Where are we right now with all of this?
Well, you're right. There really are. It really is like a tennis match and the ball going back and forth. A lot of twists and turns. Where we are right now is the Supreme Court of Maryland is weighing whether or not to take the appeal that has been filed by Mr. Syed's attorney. And they have put a stay on the court order by the Intermediate Appellate Court, which reinstated his conviction. So his conviction is kind of in a state of
I can't imagine that feels good for this person. He was convicted when he was 17. Um, Even his court records still have his wrong age, making him a year older. He spent over 20 years, which is a long time, and then, you know, on circumstances that were apparently not as clear cut as you'd think.
there's no action on it. We're just waiting for the Supreme Court to decide whether they are going to hear the case, and then we will be waiting for their decision. His lawyer, Mr. Syed's lawyer, has raised several legal issues that she says are new issues that should be decided by the court in this moving forward.
Do prosecutors, the state attorney's office down there, you have a new state attorney, right? Marilyn Mosby is gone, is my understanding. Does the new state attorney agree that this should be vacated? Or does the new state attorney see it differently than
Ivan
Mosby?
Bates.
That maybe it was a political ploy by her, a little diversion from her own federal criminal trial. What's going on down there with that?
You're right. There really were a lot of those things in the backdrop with the previous state's attorney. She that was just before the election, and you're right. There is that other legal case involving her that makes some people conjecture about what some of the motivations might have been. But the new state's attorney, Mr. Ivan Bates, has not really said anything about the case. He's waiting for the appeals process to play.
Another political answer. Um, I'm going to chime in here a little bit because I did do some digging. He's saying Ivan Bates has not said too much, and he probably hasn't since he's been in office. But this is a Wikipedia, which I know is a pretty low bar. But the quote, and I did see a little interview, and I'll try to dig it up for a future video. In May of 2018, which is well before Ivan Bates was in office, of course, told Rolling Stone that he would drop charges against Adnan Syed, the serial podcast host who was serving. That's kind of a weird way to say it. Wikipedia kind of stinks, but serving life in prison. But he said he would drop the charges, and that was back in May of 2018, he said to Rolling Stone. So he has said things but again, now that he's in office, not quite sure. According to one of the podcasts, Ivan Bates was a junior prosecutor when the crime was committed. Um, Okay, and as far as Marilyn Mosby, was this political to do this at the end of her tenure, right before the elections? If I were to throw an opinion out there, I would have to say, yeah. She has been federally charged for perjury and making false mortgage applications. Um, Roughly, she said that she was having a COVID hardship. This is allegedly, and from what I understand from news reports, the quote I just made was from the Department of Justice. Um, she then took the money, filled out mortgage applications again to try to get lower interest rates, apparently or allegedly, and then purchased 2 vacation homes in Florida. Makes me want to run and get a GoFundMe for her. What a hardship. But, did she do it right before Ivan Bates got in office just so that it could be on her little record? I'd have to say, yeah, she did.
Yeah.
That's
My
interesting.
opinion.
That's very interesting. Now, the basis for the original motion to vacate was there
Muddy.
alleged exculpatory evidence, like evidence that the prosecutor hid or that no one knew about, some new evidence that showed that he was 100% innocent? Or was there just some evidence that could have raised a reasonable...
And we could get mired down in the case and the wrongdoings of anybody in law enforcement, and the attorneys and just the witnesses, and just the muddy. You better get some waders on for this one, because the muck is deep.
doubt.
There really are a lot of things swirling in the backdrop there, and some of these things are issues that were raised in the very podcast that brought so much attention to this. What the prosecutors were focusing on was they have contended that that the prosecutors did not share adequate evidence that with his lawyers at the time, and that it was unfair for him, for his legal team not to have that. And that includes ideas of possible other suspects who could have played a role in this. And then another thing that came up too, after Marilyn Mosby decided not to move forward with new charges, they pointed to new DNA evidence. There had been DNA evidence that had been found, and they ran new tests. They said at the time, they said they weren't going to move forward with charges, and that DNA evidence did not include any of Mr. Syed's. So there's that aspect to it as well.
That was on his shoe.
That
was on her shoes? Was that on?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And then there were other issues too. I mean, that were old aspects of the case. Faulty cell tower evidence that was not reliable was an aspect of that. So there's a lot of this was explored in the podcast, and has been people have been hearing about it since that was going back in 2014.
And one final question before we run out of time, Brian. The not sharing the evidence, did Marilyn Mosby speak with the original prosecutor about that? Because I thought I read some quotes from him that he claims that they did share it, and his original attorney is dead, so that attorney can't say anything, right?
She is passed away.
Yeah, there's been some murkiness in that area.
Some murkiness.
It's kind of not been something that's been hugely discussed publicly. There's sort of a he said, she said aspect to all of that. What was known, what wasn't known, what was shared, what wasn't shared. And there's also some elements of notes that were read and interpreted, and how different people interpreted who and what were exactly mentioned in these notes. So there's a lot of confusion on that point, to be honest.
Absolutely. This is the most complicated, confusing, procedurally, factually, everything about this case. So we appreciate your time tonight. Brian Witte from the Associated Press. I'm sure we'll be speaking again about this, so thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, let's bring back in our think tank. Ann Bremner, Rick King, Michael Sterling. All right. Rick, are you chomping at the bit? Are you chomping at the bit right now? What's on your mind?
I would say the word I would use is trepidation, but go ahead.
Go
Trepidation.
ahead. Give me your thoughts about where we are in this whole thing and
Dive
what
headfirst in
is
this
getting to
dumpster
justice
fire.
in this case.
So can I tell you my first thought listening to everything that just took place right now? My first thoughts to me are we live in a society where we say we would rather have 9 guilty people go free than 1 innocent person go to prison. And so I'm concerned about the level of evidence that whether there was some Brady violations, whether there was some exculpatory DNA evidence, those things are all disconcerting to me. And so I look at
I don't
those
know if it
things.
was exculpatory DNA evidence. They said there was no DNA from the defendant on her shoes, and somebody else's DNA was on her shoes.
Right.
But
Well, whether or
isn't
not
that
DNA would show up in her
exculpatory?
shoes is a question. I don't know. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, I think that this gentleman is entitled to real justice and a real indication of whether or not he's
The DNA not on the shoes. I don't want to take sides yet, but the DNA not being on the shoes, were they found in the car? Because I'm not sure they were found with her when she was found, which means that did they, they're saying the person who carried her from wherever to Lincoln Park where she was found, the shoes were on, and that's how the DNA got on the bottom of the shoes, because, how do you get DNA on the bottom of your shoes? But then what, they took them off and put them back in the car? I mean, some of the things, were they found in the car or not? I don't know. We're gonna have to find out where they were found. Have to get the list of what was found in the car.
guilty of this crime or not. And right now, for me, I'm just concerned about what happened back then, because you hear these things, and actually you don't even hear them. You see them today, where there are miscarriages of justice that take place, and I'm concerned, and I really don't at this point, whether or not the old state attorney had a political agenda moving forward with what she did, really is of
Probably.
no consequence to where we are
Allegedly.
right now. Because she made a decision, she vacated the conviction.
True.
And here in Florida, we have Marsy's Law, which says the victim has an absolute opportunity to come forward and be a part and have a real participation in these types of proceedings. But the proceeding that we had was a motion by the prosecutor to vacate the prosecution. So the prosecutor was moving to vacate. The defense lawyer was, we agree. And if that's where we are, the procedural remedy for fixing this is to allow the victim an opportunity to be heard. But at the end of the day, the prosecutor has said and is saying that this isn't a prosecution that we believe should stand any longer. And so the real remedy, I don't think, changes the outcome of what we have.
Right.
All right,
maybe.
we only have a short amount of time, but Mike Sterling, got to hear from you on this one.
Yeah, Vinny, I mean, what we're hearing procedurally is nothing about the innocence or guilt of the defendant. It's all about a notice issue, right? So the question is whether under victim rights, under Baltimore state law, lots of states have them, victims are entitled to notice before substantial hearings. I've got cases here in Georgia, before there's a bond hearing, the victim's got to be notified. So the question is that the appeals court was trying to figure out, how do you remedy a failure to properly notify someone, a victim who has rights under state law? And this is what they said was the remedy. Now the Supreme Court will have to weigh in on it, because I think it'll be a significant decision in terms of how victims are treated going forward, and whether or not failure to notify a victim is such a material issue that you have the authority to vacate something significant like this, which is a conviction being overturned on a motion by the prosecution.
Okay, so that is that. Looks like they didn't have enough time for all the people. So as you can see, so deep. It'll be interesting to take smaller pieces and take a real hard look objectively at that. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you. Like, subscribe, follow, send to your friends. Bye.